אוקיי, שלום לכולם.
שלום.
Hello, Charles. Welcome to our Zoom meeting.
Hello.
Let me just say a couple of words about Wheelers and what we are about, and I will introduce you and you can take it from there. So I guess the people who are here know, but if you are watching in the recording, Wheeler is an organization or company or whatever you want to call it that tries to make the information about accessibility more accessible and more correct, because as you might know, when we get to a place or we call a place and we ask about accessibility, not all the time the answer that we get is an accurate answer to what's going on, and sometimes we can get to a place and have a really bad time because what they told us over the phone is not accurate. So what we are doing, we have a community of people who can share first-hand experience about the places they have been to, and share the accessibility according to their own disability. And the people who get the information know what kind of disability the person has, and they can assess from there how the place that they want to go to is accessible for them. And in the future, we won't be only in the Facebook community, we will have a website that brings all this information together. And that's basically what Wheelers is about. And I welcome Mr. Charles Fleisher to our Zoom. I will let you introduce yourself and not say too many words. So Charles, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to present to your group. So I am Charles Fleisher. I'm 53 years old. Back in 1988, I was in a spinal cord. I was in a car accident, passenger, and I wound up with a fairly high level spinal cord injury. I am a C5, C6, which means I'm paralyzed from the upper chest down with limited use of my arms, no use of my hands really. I have some wrist function and I can't move or feel from my upper chest down. So that 18 years old with the whole life ahead of me, I thought that I would be very limited. And there obviously is a lot of limitations that go along with that. But I was lucky enough to have a really good rehab at that point, and they kind of exposed me to things I never would have imagined. And that kind of triggered my love of travel, my love of adventure, being able to do whitewater rafting and hot air ballooning in a rehab setting when I was 18 years old. But that being said, that is a situation that's pretty rare. There aren't a whole lot of rehabs like that. So coming out of the rehab, it was kind of baby steps from there, just kind of getting out into my community, kind of testing my own barriers. And this is what I recommend for people who aren't already experienced travelers. It can be overwhelming getting started. So just test your own neighborhood, see what you could do within your scope, and step it up from there. You know, reach out, start stretching out to from a couple hours to maybe a short overnight, to taking longer and longer trips to whatever your ability or comfort level takes you to. So that's kind of my story, how I got started and what launched me into a lifelong lover of travel. I kind of touch base with your group because I live fairly close to New York City. I put up I responded to a post where you're reaching out, somebody was asking for information about travel to New York and New York area. And I'm like, that's right up my wheelhouse. I was born in New York. I grew up in New Jersey. I've never really lived further than an hour car ride, train ride, bus ride, try and get into the city on a regular basis to see shows, to enjoy all the cultural and activities all year round. So from my perspective is a little bit different from where you guys are going to be coming in from. So I'm going to try and touch base in how you might be traveling versus how I travel. And that would obviously involve, where are you going to go? If you're going to New York City, it's a huge place. It's a big place. I'm going to focus today on traveling in and around Manhattan. And if you're a tourist in Manhattan, you're going to want to probably stay in and around the Times Square area. I would recommend for a trip. This way you can access the public transportation pretty easily. And in and around Manhattan within 10 city blocks. So New York is on a grid. It's streets going east to west from like 10 or 12th Street all the way up into the hundreds. And avenues run north and south, which run almost the north-south length of the island. So it's pretty easy to navigate because it's numbered streets and numbered avenues. So in Times Square, you'd be like 42nd, and I think it's like there's like a couple different avenues. It's like in the 9th Avenue, 8th Avenue, Broadway. Obviously, it's also Broadway also has a numbered. I don't know which number it is, but from there you set up a home base in and out, and you could travel up and down the Manhattan Island pretty easily. When you are traveling, and I know a lot of people who have experience, my experience is, my girlfriend teases me all the time that I'm worse than bringing a baby because of all the gear I have to have. She's like, this is your stroller and this is your diaper bag, because I got so much stuff that I got to carry. So, but traveling into and out of New York, you're not going to be landing in Manhattan if you're flying. You're going to have to take other types of transportation. I myself, need almost a suitcase to myself for my medical supplies and clothing and things like that. I have to travel with a shower chair. So the most direct ways to get from New York to New York airports is to rent something or hire out a company that has a van. So a van with a lift, if you're wheelchair dependent, is probably the best way to go. But I know that's not an option for everybody because they're not necessarily affordable to rent a van. So the three major New York City airports are Newark Airport and Kennedy and LaGuardia Airport. And they have pros and cons. Kennedy, Newark, you're not actually flying into New York, but it is a stone's throw away. It's a different state, but Newark Airport has direct access to train by mass transit trains into Midtown Manhattan. But this is kind of it. So this is a process. If you can't take a van, the train's an option, but you'd have to take the train to your terminal, pick up your luggage, and after that, you've got to get an air train, which is a light rail train. That'll take you to New Jersey Transit, which is another train, but it's pretty easy. And that will take you down into Penn Station, New York, which is like 33rd. I'm not going to bother you with it. So it takes you pretty much into Midtown Manhattan, which if you could get a spot in that neighborhood and set up there, that is fairly accessible to most of the big sites. It's not that far from Times Square. It's not far from most of the major museums. You could take transportation, mass transportation from those two, from there. Might be better to get located someplace a little bit closer to Times Square if you do that, but not necessary. You could also, from the airport, you can take a cab. You can get accessible cabs. But if you don't arrange for a cab ahead of time, you might be waiting because it's not like there's as many accessible taxis waiting around Newark Airport that are going to take you across the river. It's actually across, you have to travel from one state to another to go from Newark Airport. So your three options are, rent a vehicle or have somebody arranged, take a cab, or take the train. There's pros and cons to all of them, and it's something you're going to want to think about. Now, LaGuardia, I've never flown into. Again, I'm from New Jersey, so I don't have to get to Manhattan from these airports. There are ways to get there, but I wouldn't recommend mass transit. I wouldn't recommend LaGuardia if you're flying into New York, because you'd have to take mass transit. You'd have to take like subways, and the New York City subway system is not the best. You'd have to rent a car. They have something called the New York City Airporter, which is kind of a shuttle that'll get you from LaGuardia and Kennedy, but I can't recommend them. I've never used them. And you're going to be on your own, kind of loading your equipment and your gear. And I don't know how much space they have on these kinds of shuttles for extra gear. So both Kennedy and LaGuardia, you're going to be in that situation. If you're flying in either of those airports, you're probably going to want to rent or arrange for some kind of vehicle, accessible vehicle, to pick you up and take you into the city. If you're going to Lower Manhattan, which is a wonderful place, it's got older cities, the Freedom Tower / the old World Trade Center is down there. They've got the streets where they're kind of more intimate. They're not big, wide city streets. That's a great place to visit, but that's going to put you a little bit further from things like Broadway and the Broadway shows and museums in Midtown and Lower Manhattan. But there's pros and cons to all of these places. And again, it's fairly accessible, easy for you to get to. Once you land, I wanted to mention there is something that when I put out a post recently, someone told me, are there still something called Big Apple greeters, which I haven't used personally, but check out their website. They're volunteers, New York City residents that will, free of charge or for tips or donation to the organization, they can help you navigate. They can help give you a tour. So if you're flying in, look up Big Apple greeters and see if they might be able to help you navigate, find accessible places, or just have knowledgeable people in the city that are volunteers that will help you. Once
Charles,
you land, yes, go ahead.
While you're on the subject of transportation, do you know if you need to tell the train in advance to coordinate your trip, or
You do not.
you can go on the train whenever?
You can.
And
All of the New Jersey transits have they have lock boxes on the platforms, and the conductors for the trains will grab a ramp and set it up on the train. So you're gonna need that. So if you are there, that's a good point. You want to look for a conductor as soon as they get off the train, because they're on the trains. There's nobody like working on the platforms, and tell them you need a ramp.
okay,
as soon as the train stops, and they'll unlock the box and they'll put that there.
I see. And about Uber, do you know if Uber has accessible taxis, or how does it work exactly?
I don't think at a point you want to be relying on it.
I see.
I think it's very hit or miss for accessible Ubers in and around the airports in New York.
Even if you order in advance.
You would. So let's just say I'm not familiar. You might be able to.
Okay.
I have never done it, so I can't really speak to whether it's doable. It might be, and you could possibly, that's a good option to look into.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So once you land in New York, how to get around. So if you take the train from Newark, depending on where you're going to go, New York City does have a lot of accessible cabs. You can move around in a wheelchair or with mobility issues within Manhattan. They have, if you dial 311 on your phone, and I'm assuming that would, I shouldn't assume, but I'm hoping that would translate for people coming in and out of other countries and states to be able to dial 311, and you can request an accessible cab ride anywhere in Manhattan, and they're usually pretty good. You just have to make sure that you have a street address, because if you tell them, oh, I'm in front of Starbucks, and they're like, okay, well, there's 300 Starbucks in Manhattan, right? You can't even tell them the street because there might be multiple Starbucks on that street in different locations. So you need an address you can call, and you can move around New York in a cab, but that can get costly and that can get pricey. So next option, and this is my preferred way of traveling if I have to go from New York, from the southern tip to the northern tip or anywhere in between or east or west, and that's the bus system. So the bus system is extensive in Manhattan, and every single New York City bus, and most of the time they're maintained and work, has a wheelchair ramp. They have a fold-out ramp. They'll wait at the bus stop. They're pretty clearly marked, and you can take the bus anywhere. And they run pretty regularly during the day. You're talking 15 to 20-minute intervals in anywhere in Manhattan. You could get a bus. That being said, before you try and get on a bus, you can't pay on the bus with money. Before you get on a bus in New York City, you need to get something called a Metro Pass. And that's pretty much just like a swipe card. And be prepared, get one of those. Although I will tell you a little inside tip. The bus has, and this is all pre-COVID, but a New York City bus driver, I've never been charged on a New York City bus showing up in a wheelchair. That's kind of a down kind of courtesy. I don't know if it's technically policy or not, but most of the bus drivers will let you ride with a guest or two even for free. But I want you to be prepared to have your Metro card ready if you have to pay for a ride, because you don't want to be on the bus and be like, oh, you got to pay. But one more step with on the Metro card, and this is kind of a pain. You can't really get Metro cards at street level. You kind of have to go down into the subway, and they have vending machines for a Metro card. And moving between the buses and the subway, I would not recommend, if you're not walking or if you can't go down steps, to try the subway systems, because the subway systems in New York, only 33% of stops have elevators. And I have been where I've gone to 3 different elevators and they were all broken. So try to avoid the subways unless it's an extreme situation or you just want to go for the New York experience in the subway. I would try not to go into the subways. And also, so this system was built in 1909 through 1930. That's most of these subways and platforms were originally built. And a lot of them have been updated, but a lot of them haven't. And the trains and the platforms, there's often as much as a full step to get off the platform into the subway train. And there are not conductors, there are not ramps, there's no one there to help you. So if you cannot get up a step, then don't try the subways at all. But I'm not trying to discourage anybody, because you can still get around with the trains. I mean, you can still get around with the buses and the taxis, and it's fairly, you could spend a whole week in and around Times Square without ever having to use mass transit. If you're just gonna use your wheelchair, or if you have the ability to walk around, you can stay in that area and you'd be fine if you're able to travel 20 minutes to a half an hour without getting on buses and trains and things of that nature, you would have no problem whatsoever. Okay, so now we're going to favorite things, my favorite things, to do for free. We'll start, that's usually the best option if you're landing in a city and you don't, have a whole lot of money to spend in an expensive city to stay. Certainly, Times Square is a fun thing. At this point, it's more of just a touristy thing for me to do, but it's a touristy thing that if you're in New York, you kind of have to do it, right? It's there's lots of big lights and it's lots of it's a great walking around, people watching, kind of a place to go. There's they certain parts of Broadway are shut down now for street traffic, so it's opened up for people to sit and to get yourself a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and sit and just take in the excess of Times Square and New York City, because it is over the top excessive with billboards and stuff. So if you set up in Manhattan, if you sit up in and around that area, a cool little thing to take in is the Marriott Marquis is a hotel, and they have glass elevators inside the building, and you have access, you can see outside. So I try and hit that up every time I'm in the city, and they have a bar / restaurant where you could spend a little time up there. I don't know if they let you in without having to buy a drink, or you can pretend like you're looking around, and it actually rotates. So the floor rotates, so it could give you a cool view of Manhattan in this rotating restaurant. Also, there's right along the Hudson River, there's some piers. You could spend a whole day just walking around on the Hudson River, taking in the buildings. It goes from the lower tip all the way to the northern tip on the east side of Manhattan. So that's just a cool thing to be able to walk around. You could hop on the bus and jump into Central Park from Times Square. From Times Square, it's walking. It's a little bit of a walk. Or sorry, I shouldn't say walking, but travel by, through your wheelchair. You could get there relatively short.
You can say walking. Everybody gets it.
Yeah, everybody gets it. Try to be sensitive to it.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but it doesn't bother me either. So I get it. So accessible, short. I think probably 20 minutes to a half an hour from Times Square to get to Central Park. Columbus Circle is a real nice, again, people. And once you get into the park, I mean, you could spend a couple days in Central Park if you're a nature lover. If you love, the trees, and there's all kinds of water features. And something really cool about New York, Central Park, they've got 200 bridges, and they're all designed differently. So if you're an architecture person and you're a bridge person, which I kind of am, my grandfather was an iron worker, and he worked in and around New York City, him and his brother. So I love bridges. So he's got all these cool little bridges. A lot of the city museums are free, but air quotes here, free, but they recommend a donation when you go. So my favorite museums right near Central Park is the Metropolitan. It's one of the most amazing museums I've ever been to, and the Museum of Natural History. This is a great day or two. This is just in the northern part of Midtown Manhattan, where you could you could spend a day in either of those museums and spend a couple hours in the park, or multiple days. Another last little free thing, there's something called the High Line. which, and if they're for people who aren't familiar with an elevated train, New York City used to have a lot of trains that ran above ground and elevated above the streets, and they're pretty much mostly gone now. But somebody had the foresight of turning one into a walking garden, and that runs from like 36th Street, which is kind of Midtown, to kind of lower Manhattan. It's a mile and a half, and it's very accessible. It's fairly new addition within the last 15 years. So that's a cool little thing to be able to get an elevator up to the level of the old train tracks, and it's a walking garden. So getting into cool stuff that I love to do, a little bit more pricey, right? Sorry. You could take a tour around New York in something called the Circle Line, which is pretty accessible. I've seen they have ramps that go on to, and it's a boat ride that'll take you from like 42nd Street in Manhattan, which is Midtown, and that you could get there in a very short bus ride from Times Square, and you could take anywhere from like an hour to a 3-hour ride. The hour ride will take you down beautiful views of the New Jersey and New York skyline in and around. Sorry. Let me do the mute real quick. In and around the Statue of Liberty, all the big buildings. You can't get off there and see, but they take you close enough where you get a good look at the Statue of Liberty. And if you take the full ride around the Manhattan, they give you a tour. They give you like feedback on like what's here, what's there. They take you under the Brooklyn Bridge and a bunch of other bridges. That's cool if you could spend 3 hours doing that. Better, of course, in nicer weather. They also have one that goes at night, so you can see New York all lit up. Of course, the restaurants are amazing in and around New York. I want to recommend, if everybody, it's not everybody, but famous for their pizza. Don't get any chain pizza in New York. I will never forgive you if you don't buy pizza that's local and the $3 or $2.50 slice of pizza. And it's usually the kind of places that, like most little restaurants, it's the little side ones that are, I wouldn't say shady looking, but not clean and kept up all that well. Those are the best places to get pizza. Don't order a whole pizza. Get yourself slices. They're crunchy and crispy. Of course, it's got amazing delis. New York is famous for delis. Awesome, bagels, but don't get your bagel everywhere. Check your reviews. I don't go to fancy, expensive restaurants because you could spend, $100, $200 a plate. But so there's so many great restaurants. Find out what's your area that you like to, what kind of food you want to eat, and go from there. But lots of great stuff. Of course, you've got to see Broadway. If you're going to be into Manhattan, you want to hit up a Broadway show. There are some ways to save your money on tickets. There is a discount Tix store. I don't know how to. I'll have to send that along. But you could get like last minute tickets in Times Square, and same day shows, next day shows, and they're usually a lot cheaper. You go to, you can try to get handicap seats ahead of time through, usually all Broadway shows are like on Ticketmaster and things like that, but they could get pretty pricey. They used to have discounts for people with mobility challenges, but Ticketmaster in the United States kind of owns the world of ticketing now. So they'll sell it to anybody. Unfortunately, they'll sell mobility impaired tickets to anybody. So they're a little bit harder to get. So definitely, if you want to see a show, I recommend, Hamilton. I know it's kind of an American history, but it's a great, awesome play, one of the popular ones here. Let me check my notes here for a second. Now, New York, for the most part, you stay in the touristy areas, very accessible. There are curb cuts. You call them curb cuts there or something similar, where the curbs are cut out so you could get down. You know, you're not going to have an issue getting across streets and up and down. They're pretty reliable for getting around, and they're obviously like anywhere in the world. Nothing is perfectly maintained. If you get out of the parts of the city that are a little less trafficked, you might have to deal with an occasional route coming up in the middle of your path where you're going to be interrupted, and you might have to go back and turn around or cross the street or something like that. And but for the most part, like I said, it's very good. And all your places that you're going to be visiting, the major places, the museums. We have something called the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was enacted in 1989, which requires all kinds of businesses to be accessible. There's nothing perfect. There are some grandfathers, things that are older, where you won't be able to get access to places, but there's so much more that's not going to be an issue. New York is notorious for kind of mayhem as far as driving and walking. So, don't take it personally when people are walking fast. If you ask for help and they don't necessarily respond to you. I've got some great stories I could share about New York City's unique attitude when you're talking to New York City people. But I've been to a lot of cities, and a lot of cities where it's fast paced. You get more of that than you do when you go outside the city in the more rural areas. Although all of New York and all over and around New York and New Jersey and parts of Connecticut, you might experience people who aren't the most polite, so just, in my experience, it's just smile and laugh and ask the next person, because they do have I don't want you to let somebody else's attitude ruin your good time. And if it happens a couple times, then, what are you going to do? Yeah. So New York, like many other cities, you do have to be careful. Crime is an issue. I have never had any problems at all in Manhattan, but that doesn't mean that other people haven't. And I have seen that in recent years and pre-COVID there has been an uptick. So just be aware, be smart. I wouldn't go out of the real main touristy areas too late. They say New York is a city that never sleeps, and that's true, but it has again, things have calmed down since COVID. And as far as like businesses and the busyness, and I haven't been to Times Square in a year and a half or so, but I think it's getting busier again. But again, with New York and like any other city, just be careful about what the environment you're going to put yourself in. Just be aware and things like that. Before I share any stories or anything, do you want to see if there's any questions that anybody has, or do our hosts have any questions?
There are a couple of questions. Neria asked if it's possible to take a day trip to the Niagara Falls.
No.
No.
Day trip? No.
But so what would be the way if you wanted to go to Niagara Falls from New York?
Okay, so if you want a weekend trip to Niagara Falls, you're gonna need to drive or take a plane.
So
Niagara Falls,
it's gonna take a couple of days, at least.
yes. So just Niagara Falls from Manhattan, driving is probably 9 to 11 hours. If you're driving, it's probably an hour and a half flight. Even though Canada doesn't have the Americans with Disabilities Act, I've been to Niagara Falls. It's in and around the falls is beautiful. The hotels are accessible. If you make it to Niagara Falls, they have a butterfly sanctuary, which is an amazing little place, and that has great ramps and stuff. So Niagara Falls is accessible. Day trip, you'd have to do more. You'd have to do at least a weekend. And if you were driving, I guess it's a full day drive either way.
Another question that was asked is, you recommended the local pizzerias and restaurants, but are they mostly accessible or not?
So I'd say you probably have, for anybody who, mostly, I'd say mostly especially around the touristy areas. And if you see a curb or a step, they'll usually bring out a ramp for you. So you can get a small, but a lot of places in New York are also very tight as far as space. So in a lot of the older, fancier places, it's going to be a tight squeeze sometimes. But traveling in the summer now, a lot of these restaurants have now got outdoor spaces that they didn't have, which makes things a little bit easier for some of the restaurants that aren't. But I'd say you've got at least a 50-50 chance, and probably better than that in the high tourist areas, that most wheelchairs you'll be able to get in and have a decent time and experience. Just let them know.
Another question that was asked was about the Statue of Liberty. Is it accessible to visit it?
Yes, I wanted to mention that too. So the Statue of Liberty, the best place if you're in Manhattan to take it is a place called Battery Park. And they have a ferry, an accessible ferry that'll take you to Ellis Island, which is famous for, it was a place for screening for immigration in US history. You know, millions of people went through. They take you to Ellis Island. A lot of people are able to check relatives and see if they have relatives who emigrated through there. And from there, they'll take you to the island of the Statue of Liberty, which is 100% wheelchair accessible all the time. But caveat, if you want to go and there are elevators in the statue, you have to buy tickets for access to inside the statue ahead of time. But you can get into the statue with advanced tickets. You don't need advanced tickets just to get on the island.
Another question about the hotels.
Yes,
Do you think that there's an accessible room in every hotel mostly? And about the prices, if you know, if it's more expensive.
Okay, so the big chains, the Marriotts, the Hiltons, all of those, you could usually get an accessible room. New York is a big city. Their rooms are tight. So even if you get an accessible room, there is sometimes, I wouldn't say there was issues, but they're going to be tight rooms for the most part, anywhere you book a room. So I would stay with the big chains if you're going to be staying in New York. Smaller hotels, they're not necessarily going to be as guaranteed, let me say. You could kind of rely on, but not guarantee accessibility in the smaller hotels and the ones that aren't part of chains. You could guarantee yourself accessibility. You got to check with the hotels. You got to don't book something. I would not recommend booking anything until you speak to somebody on the site of that for a big trip. You know, we're talking, for me, I have a problem, I find another hotel. That's not gonna, if you're traveling from out of state or out of country, I would make sure I speak to somebody on site about what kind of rooms they have. You could probably, you might be able to do the same thing with like an Airbnb. I've traveled to different cities. I've never really booked Airbnb in New York, but in other cities, my rule of thumb is I need to talk to the person and make sure via some kind of communication that the doors are wide enough and that there's an elevator. And I went to Thailand once. The guy told me it was accessible, and there was 4 steps to get into the place. And I booked this place in Thailand, right? So where am I going to go? He's like, well, I'm able to get my 80-year-old grandmother. She's up the stairs. I'm like, I'm 300 pounds, 200 pounds. My wheelchair is 100 pounds. That's not working for me. You got to be, that was because I booked it directly off of hotels.com without talking to, it said accessible. So for a big trip, you got to get in touch with somebody on site before you make it. It's a pain. It's a hassle, but it's going to save you a lot of trouble on the other end. And I know Airbnb has some accessibility options, but again, they're not screening that. The corporation is not. The people who post check off, I think, what accessibility means to them.
Yeah, that's why Wheelers is here.
What's that?
And so that's why we are here, Wheelers.
Yes.
Do you have any recommended hotels specifically in New York City?
Any Marriotts, I always have a good time. They're a little bit more pricey than some of the cheaper ones, but that's usually my go-to. That's probably lots of people have their preferred hotels, and they get points for staying. That's usually where I go. And I'm not getting any endorsement from Marriott. It's just they're a really responsible hotel. And in New York, you're gonna find 50 different Marriotts all over the city. They have subsidiaries, I guess, companies they bought along the way. So when you go on Marriott's site, it's not just Marriott, it's a whole bunch of different brands, and you're going to get something reliable. And if you need a roll and shower or something like that, it's a little bit tricky because sometimes they won't guarantee until like a couple of days ahead of time.
Yeah,
but that's most chains. It's really unfair, but they do that sometimes.
But
So
what you're saying is that Marriott is quite reliable in that sense.
Yes, that's mostly because of the way I travel. When I travel and I across the United States, and I almost always get a Marriott, and they're one of the largest hotel chains in the world. They're very, very well represented within Manhattan.
Cool. So listen, I've got to ask my own question because I'm
you can't ask a question.
I'm a big music fan, and
okay.
I like jazz, and I was wondering if you could recommend some like a good place in New York to see some a little bit underground music, or a little bit like jazz and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're hitting me in a soft spot because I don't but I'm sure there are lots. Just reach but the lots of the venues are tricky.
Yeah.
The clubs might not necessarily be as accessible, but I'm just gonna admit my ignorance and say I don't really have any direct recommendations.
I had to try because
Yeah. I don't. So New York, you're probably one of the best places if that's what you're looking for. But I'm going to tell you that it's not quite what it was for jazz in New York the way it was once upon a time.
I see.
Hopefully it's building up more live venues, because you couldn't get live music hardly at all. It was 2 years ago. So
yeah,
lots of restaurants have kind of gotten away, unfortunately, from doing live performances.
COVID was not so great for that.
No, it was obviously terrible.
How hard is it to rent a vehicle with a lift, and either it's from the back or from the side, as somebody else who would drive?
Yeah, I don't think it would be hard. it would just be expensive.
So, yeah. Okay.
And you would have probably both options as far as most of these places have multiple vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, New York is New York. You can get anything for a price, right?
Yeah.
But the cost of renting actually renting a vehicle to get around New York is probably going to be up there.
I think somebody on our Facebook page or group posted some rental companies in United States for accessible vehicles. So that's something to check out.
Yes, yes. But here's kind of a catch. If you're renting a vehicle in New York City, it's not particularly practical. There's no place, well, not that there's no place, but it's hard to park. You're gonna have to pay for parking. And during traffic, high traffic, it might take you a half an hour to go what would take you 5 minutes in your wheelchair. Certain times of the day, it's gonna be hard. So having a vehicle, if it's a necessary thing, obviously, but it's not going to, it might be better to try and find a company that will help you on demand versus renting. You might have a company that you get a relationship. You'd be like, look, if I need to go to X to Z, can you send somebody out and drive me there? If public transportation is not an option for you, if you can't take the bus or not able to take the bus, or you're not able to take a cab. And okay, so just a quick, the cabs are essentially, I don't know if minivan is translates or not, but they're kind of, so higher wheelchairs, somebody who's got a real high, there might be an issue getting into some of the taxi cabs because they're not all that high. I'd say. So I'm 6 foot tall, but I'm in a manual chair, so I have no problem getting into any. But I could see how somebody in a higher chair that might have a higher support for their neck or something like that might not get into some of the standard taxi cabs. But there are certainly companies out there that will take you from point A to point B, and if they know you're coming, come pick you up at the airport, take you to a hotel, get you settled. He's like, look, I'm going to a Broadway play. I need to get from my hotel to Broadway and back a certain day. You cut a price ahead of time. You know what to expect. And there are a lot of them out there. I haven't used them directly because I haven't needed it. I could use the buses and I could use the cabs for the most part.
Okay, Charles, there are probably a million questions that can be asked, and maybe we will have you on again.
Yes.
So, thank you very much for your time, and amazing to hear about New York, and it's a dream, and maybe it will come true soon. So
cool. Hey, well, if you make it, reach out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.